Just like to say hello and welcome for those of you who've made it here. Since this is the first event of the Libertarian Society since we founded, just back there in the middle of March, I felt it would be appropriate that the first event be both introductory and kind of informative. And libertarianism as a whole has been receiving a lot of press recently, especially across the water in the United States. And whilst that's great for the likes of myself and fellow libertarians to see it getting such a good press, it creates a situation where people may misunderstand it or hear and believe some of the commonly held misconceptions about it. And that's kind of the thinking behind this kind of event, was just something introductory. Our guest speaker for the day is Professor Gerard Casey. He's a professor in the School of Philosophy at University College Dublin, an adjunct professor at the Maryville Institute in Birmingham, UK, and an associate scholar at the Ludwig von Mises Institute in Alabama. He's a PhD from Notre Dame and serves on the editorial boards of Geopolitics, History and International Relations, Contemporary Readings in Law and Social Justice, and Libertarian Papers. And he recently published a book called Libertarian Anarchy Against the State, which is a very good read, by the way.
I didn't say that.
And yeah, I'm just going to wrap up here now, so I'm going to hand over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, look, I'm delighted to be here. This is going to be the biggest crowd I've ever drawn in Queens, which is a little less exciting when you realise this is the first time we've ever actually spoken up here. Okay, but there we are. So I'm very pleased to be here. I'm delighted that the Libertarian Society is starting, and anything I can do to help now or in the future.
You got that going?
Yeah. Do I have to say all that again? No, I'm just joking. Anyway, so I'm delighted to be here. So I was going to say, this is my talk for today. Look, well, actually, that's a joke. This is my talk for today. Okay, so you can all relax. Okay, so let's keep this humane and human. So what is the first question is what is libertarianism? And I have to tell you that the only answer that you can really give to this is the blinding obvious. Libertarians are in favour of liberty. Okay. And you go, well, yeah, but isn't everybody? And the answer is no, not everybody is. Now, if I had a whiteboard, which I don't, what I would now do is draw a diagram. The standard tool of analysis for politics, more or less everywhere, is left-right. Okay, so when you're talking to people, they say, oh, that's very right-wing, or that's left-wing, or you're right of centre, or left of centre, or whatever it might be. And the image is this one-dimensional line. Left over, as you look at it, left over here, right over here, and then people get plotted on it. Now, let's see where a libertarian gets plotted on this line. So I just wrote down a few things. Would a libertarian be in favour of personal freedoms, sexual freedoms and so on? The answer would be yes. Is that left-wing or right-wing? It's on the left, right? Okay. Let's see. Economic freedoms. Freedom to do with your property as you will, provided you don't damage anybody else's. Which, left or right? On the right. On the right. Low taxes or no taxes?
Right.
On the right. And so on. So what you do is, as you start going through various little kind of questions, you suddenly realise that a libertarian seems to be have a sort of schizoid political personality. That is, if you take the one-dimensional line. In other words, parts of what a libertarian wants seem to be over here and traditionally sort of associated with the left, and parts seem to be traditionally associated with the right. Now, that could be because libertarians are politically schizoid. It could also be that the tool of analysis, the single left-right line, is actually just rubbish. In fact, libertarians cross that line orthogonally, right? That line in other words, one of the things you've got to learn if you're going to be libertarian is if somebody comes at you with a left or right line analysis, and it's very hard to resist, okay, you've got to reject it completely. Okay? Libertarians are for freedom. That means economic freedoms, personal freedoms, social freedoms, political freedoms, okay? Wherever they might group on this line, we don't care, right? And to that extent, we were prepared to work with people who are for freedom wherever they find. So in other words, if you're talking to people who are on the left, and they'll happily go along with you on the personal and sexual freedoms, for example. If you're working with people who see themselves as right wing, then they'll be very happy to hear you talking about economic freedoms and so on. But the real point is, libertarians are the only ones who are consistently for freedom across the board in every area of life. Okay. Now, I wanted to emphasize that because very often, and I'm going to do this myself. Now, when you're explaining it, you have to talk in some sense with negatives. But I want to make the point, by starting as I did, that a libertarian is actually a positive position. You really are for freedom. We take freedom so seriously that we want to see it implemented or instantiated across the board in every area of life, individual, personal, social, and political. That's what distinguishes us. So, if you're a libertarian, do you have to sign up to a 10-point plan? Do you have to commit to a creed, as it were, that you have to recite at every meeting? And the answer is no, right? The really refreshing thing and delightful thing about libertarianism is that as a libertarian, your commitment is minimal in one sense, right? The one thing that you cannot be as a libertarian is a subscriber or a supporter of policies that restrict people's liberties. As long as they don't do that, you can do anything, you can subscribe to anything you like. So let me then give you one way in which this is put forward. There's something that's called, this is usually phrased in terms of what's called the non-aggression principle. And it will say that in human actions, people may not initiate or threaten to initiate physical violence against the person or property of another. That's the core values, and it's expressed negatively. But like many negative things, what it does is it corrals a small area and says, thou shalt not in this area, but then it leaves everything else free. That's the whole point. Okay, so now let's take each of the elements of that definition. So it's, you can't initiate physical violence. In other words, you're not allowed to start it. You know the way kids, when they're squabbling and you come in and you say, blah, 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 and one of the kids will say, she started it, or he started it, or whatever the question is. Okay, it's the instinctive reaction. So you're not allowed to be the starter of physical violence. Of course, you can use physical violence reactively, obviously in defense of your person or property. And there are issues of proportionality. We might talk about that a little bit later. But nonetheless, the point is, reactive physical violence is a different thing. And sometimes it can be hard to tell. There are always borderline problems. But nonetheless, if it's clearly the case that somebody initiates physical violence, then they've violated the libertarian principle. Or threaten to initiate physical violence. Right? Now, what's a threat? Again, there are borderline problems. What would be an example? I mean, if somebody playfully comes up to you, a friend who you know, and so on, and does this to you, you're not in any real fear that you're going to get punched in the face, right? But at 3 o'clock in the morning, walking home after a party, somebody runs up to you quickly, you've never seen before, and does the same thing. You are in fear of violence. That's a threat. There may be borderline cases, but again, broadly speaking, the categories are quite distinct, right? So threatening to initiate violence is ruled out by the non-aggression principle. What does it rule out? It rules out the initiation or the threat to initiate physical violence. Not name-calling, not rudeness. However reprehensible they are, and however desirable it is to be polite and all in society, and I'm a big supporter of these, and libertarians can be. There's nothing to prevent you doing it. The point is, if I say something that hurts your feelings, and even if I do it deliberately, I'm a jackass, right? But I haven't violated the principle of non-aggression. Okay? Unless the form of words is such as to be, if you like, to constitute a real threat. Okay? Somebody calling you up again and saying, I know where you live and I'm coming over to blow your head off. Okay? Again, could be a joke, could be a prankster, but it could be a real threat. So that kind of thing would be, but that's the threat to commit physical violence. So hurt feelings don't count, and so on. And it's against what? Well, against your person or property. Well, actually, that's redundant because on the libertarian analysis, you are your own property, right? But let's just distinguish it for the moment. So that has to be physical violence against either you, okay, in your person, your leg, and threaten to punch you in the head or whatever it might be, or to destroy your car or to burn your house down or whatever it might be. That's it. It's as simple as that. What else is a libertarian committed to as a libertarian? And the answer is nothing. Does that mean then that libertarianism is, if you like, a recipe for a complete and full moral and social life? And the answer is no. Okay? I mean, anybody who lived his life simply on the basis of the non-aggression principle would be a card-carrying, 24-carat libertarian, but would be probably a complete jerk. Right? We can make that absolutely straight, right? One of the reasons that Rothbard left the Libertarian Party when he did, he said they're all a bunch of flakes. Okay, and there are a lot of people, and libertarianism perhaps more than most, every political movement and so on associates nutcases, right? We all know that, right? They're always there. But libertarianism perhaps more than most, it's sort of like a psychic drug. It seems to attract more than its fair share of lunatics, right? And I seem to be spending a lot of time distancing myself, and indeed many sensible people seem to spend a lot of time distancing themselves from those. And they give libertarians a bad name, and we'll be talking, at least I will, for a little while, and I'm sure your questions. But in other words, one of the things I want to try and say is what libertarians aren't, and there are many things, if you like, we get accused of we get accused of because there are head cases out there who want to do all sorts of strange things. So the point is this: I mean, if you're a libertarian, do you have to be an atheist? No. If you're a libertarian, do you have to be a religious believer? No. If you're a libertarian, can you be a religious believer? Yes. If you're a libertarian, can you be an atheist? Yes. I have people sometimes sending me hostile emails saying, I don't understand how you can be a Catholic and libertarian. And I say, it's easy, watch me. Right? But, you know, I mean, so we were just talking before, and so, I mean, in the Mises Institute, of which I'm an associated member, scholar, or whatever it's called, there are people there like myself, Tom Woods, and Jeff Tucker, who are Catholics, and so on. And then there are people like Walter Block, who's a card-carrying, full-blooded, right-on, 24-carat atheist. Is that a problem? No, absolutely not. Because we all subscribe to the same principle here. On this issue, we are at one. We can differ on the other things. So Block thinks that, you know, that we're screwy and we believe in fairy tales. Fine, it's not a big deal. I think he's benighted and doesn't understand the nature of reality. But hey, we can argue on all of these things. So one of the nice things about, if you like, having such, if you like, a small principle that you have to subscribe to is it leaves the rest of the things that you do free. You're free to so on. You can adopt any moral code, okay, which is consistent with the basic principle, is something you can adopt, and there are many. Right? There are many. You don't have to believe particular things. You have to, and so on. I mean, there are vexed questions in the libertarian movement. One of them is abortion, for example. And the question is, are you dealing here? Its question is, are you dealing here with a person's right to do with their body as they wish, or is there another body involved in that? And that raises interesting questions. And libertarians divide on this. There is still, although the issue is probably being resolved, there are interesting questions about whether or not there is actually such a thing as intellectual property, right? Because, needless to say, libertarian is concerned centrally with defending property, and if there is such a thing as intellectual property, then it needs to be defended. And if you read people like Murray Rothbard, you'll find that he's a little bit, well, he's not ambiguous, but he's not perfectly clear himself on what he thinks about this. People like Stefan Kinsella, for example, have written, who, by the way, ironically, in his day job, is a patent lawyer, right? Okay, I think it's kind of funny. Thinks there isn't any such thing. Okay, in the discussion, I haven't made up my own mind. So, again, the nice thing about libertarianism is that within libertarianism, there are lots of family squabbles that you can gleefully have in the pub, right, with fellow libertarians and abuse them and call them all sorts of names and have a lot of fun, intellectual fun. You don't have to sign up to any one of them. There's a lot of freedom there, as you would expect. And libertarians respect your freedom. They will argue till the cows come home and so on. But that's another story. Okay. So, we have there's that's the core of it, really. Now, let's then see, what does being a libertarian commit you to primarily in terms of your political view, particularly in relation to the state? In other words, what's your approach going to be towards the state? Well, broadly speaking, the very least you would want to be, if you're a libertarian of any kind, is you would want, this is the very least, you would want the smallest possible state that you could have. Right? You would want you'd want to do in other words, to do only what is absolutely essential for a state to do, and to do it with minimal impact on people's lives, freedoms, and properties. I think that's fair enough, right? So any libertarian is going to be committed to, if you like, reducing any of the states that we would currently see in the Western world. Let me just kind of illustrate to you what I think is important about this. I really need to walk around. The modern state, okay, let me just do a little bit of history. The modern state comes into being in its basic form about the end of the 15th, beginning of the 16th century. And one of the things I want to impress upon you is just how new and novel the modern state is. Okay, it really is new. In the form in which we now have it, it really doesn't come into existence until the time of the French Revolution. It's almost a 19th century invention. For most of its history, states, whether they're empires in Mesopotamia or Sumeria or whatever they are, or the Roman or whatever they might be, have not really been concerned very much at all with what people did by and large. Okay, unless they were setting fires to buildings or killing other people or failing to pay their taxes. Always something the state gets excited about, by the way. And once they did that, they basically left people alone. The modern state is different. The modern state has incipient totalitarian tendencies which find expression in various ways, sometimes with a velvet glove and sometimes nakedly. But even it's not until, as is the beginning of the modern nation state, first of all in France around 1430 under Francis I, in other words, that you begin to see the idea that the state should be the sole authority in a particular area and ultimately should determine all things of concern to it, including what people believe and how they express their beliefs and so on. And of course this finds expression in the modern state. We now have in the modern state is really the mammy and daddy state. It does, wipes your nose, which is what mammies do, and tells you to go and get jobs, which is what dad does, and so on. And the modern state is incredibly intrusive in a way that our predecessors would have found incredible. Right? The trouble is we suffer from the boiling frog syndrome. Okay, so we are the frogs. We've been put into the water, and it was cold, and then suddenly the temperature was turned up, and before we know it, we're actually boiling. But it's been so gradual; it's just normal to us. Right? And I want you to realize just how odd that is. The modern state is an abomination. Right? I had a mother and father. I really appreciated them. I don't need another one. Right? And my mom and dad were really concerned about me anyway. The state is a horrible thing to have looking after you, right? Ghastly. So here's the question then. So when I say that libertarians as such want, if you like, to reduce the state, what do they want to reduce it to? Well, let's ask ourselves how it built up, what it came from, okay? And then let's see how we might actually get it back down again. Traditionally, the justification for the state is at core that only a state or a state-like entity can provide the very basic functions which any society needs, namely of law and order, defense, justice, and protection against external aggression. So all of these kind of things. In other words, you want to be safe in your bed at night, you don't want to be robbed by people, you want to make sure that if something wrong is done to you, you get a restoration or whatever, then you need something like a state. Otherwise, you can't have it. That's the basic argument, right? And that's been around for a very long time. I don't believe that story, but that's another. But so, ask yourself if there's anything like that, if there is any state that confines itself to those functions now. And you're going to look around, but let me tell you, don't bother going through the 180 members of the United Nations. There isn't any state in existence now which says that's our job, that's all we're going to do, and we're going to do that really well. The state has expanded its sphere of interest. In fact, as I say in my book, it gets bored very quickly with what you might consider its essential functions. It's not really all that interested. It's more interested. It gets very excited when you don't pay your taxes. It doesn't get quite as excited when people break into your flat and steal your TV, right? But it does these things, but it tends to do them intermittently and badly and kind of spottily. And I would really rather be doing something else, like telling you what to do, okay, and what's good for your health and what not to eat and all of those sorts of things. So gradually, what you see is from the time of the French Revolution, the state, beginning, I suppose, it's most spectacularly with, of course, in Prussia, is the invention of the social security, the idea of the sort of cradle to grave. So we're going to look after you, right? We're going to make sure you have a job and you have proper work and all of these things. We're going to do it for you. And so the idea, so during the 19th century into the 20th century, the state becomes the main provider of things like roads, sewage, When communications come on board, they take those over, they allocate licenses for it, and so on. Transport. And then in the gradually late 19th century, 20th century, and spectacularly from the middle of the 20th century, the three big things it does: health, education, and welfare. Counting, by the way, in the Republic of Ireland for 50% of the government's budget, which means 50% of the money that I'm paying, right, unwillingly. Spectacular. Okay. Now, so one of the standard objections you'll get to libertarianism is, well, if we didn't have the state, who would make the roads? And I would say, well, the same people who did it before the state got into the business, right? Who would provide the railways? The same people who built the railways before the state got into the business. Who would make the canals? The same people who built the canals, and so on. So there, in the end, this is a very quick trip through this and so on, and there's a lot more detail. But in the end, all of the stuff about utilities is just a non-starter. There is nothing at all to prevent the market from providing more effectively and more efficiently and more cheaply and in a better way suited to people's needs, any of those kinds of things that we want, whether it's water or electricity or phone. And let me give you I use this all the time. I'm sorry if you've heard me do this before, but the example is so striking, especially in America, that I can't resist doing it. When I was growing up in the 50s and 60s in Cork, if you wanted a telephone, you had to apply to the Department of Posts and Telegraphs. How long do you think you would have to wait before you got a telephone? Give it to me, your answer in months, please.
3.
Nope. I take more. Up it. Keep going.
5.
Nope.
24.
Yes. 2 years on average before you would get a telephone. The 3-month answer, by the way, is correct if you happen to be a physician and you needed it for your practice. That was breakneck express speed. They would come and they would install this antique instrument in the most inconvenient and coldest part of your house, not where you wanted it, by the way, wherever it suited them to put it. And they would charge you a bill based on some kind of mystical incantation. Nobody knew quite how it was that you were charged. You never got anything like itemized billing, right? Now, if you had said to me at that time, or to anybody at that time, that there would be a day when not only would there be competing telephone services and that you'd have a phone in your pocket and so on, this would have been regarded as just the wildest fantasy. It was simply inconceivable. And one of the points I want to make here today is that we tend to be gripped in our imagination by what is. We are so fascinated by the way things are. It's very difficult for us to conceive. Let me give you a political example. If you lived in the 15th century or 16th century, it would have been inconceivable that you would have forms, that the majority form of government in the world would be democracies, even the representative democracies that we have. The idea that there would be very few kings, and if what kings or monarchs we have would effectively be simply constitutional figureheads, would have been simply unimaginable, right? So things change all the time. The way things are is not the way they have to be. Okay, I lost my point here. Anyway, okay, back on track. Okay, so all of the stuff about utilities, you can have fun arguing about those and so on, but in the end, it's just a matter of detail. We're working it out. I mean, let's take roads, for example. One of the standard objections to a libertarian view on roads was, well, how would you actually manage this? Every little dinky road would have its thing, and how would you do it? But we have systems now. All you do is you have a system of tolling, and as you move from one place to another, and you work out cooperative arrangements, so instead of paying as I do, wait for this, okay? So I pay 600 euros a year road tax. I pay 60% of my petrol cost is a tax, right? Plus I pay tolls, right? So I'm saying, they say, you don't want to pay for the roads? I said, yes, I do. I have no objection to paying for roads. I just want to pay for my actual use of the roads. Instead of it's like going to a restaurant and saying, well, we've worked out the average cost of people eating here, so even though you've only had a sandwich, you're going to charge you 18 quid. I go, well, I didn't have 18 quid's worth of stuff. And they say, well, somebody has to pay. I go, well, why don't I pay for the stuff? Here's a radical idea. Why don't I pay for the stuff I had and let the other people pay for the stuff they had? So all of this utility stuff it's not really a big problem. There can be some, and there's some. Walter Block has worked out stuff on roads and all of that. If you're interested in it, go look it up. Health, education, and welfare have got to go, right? These things, these goods, these public goods, as they sometimes thought of, were all provided before the state ever got into the business of providing them. Education was provided not by the state. In 18th century America, the literacy rate was close to 100%. I guarantee you it's not close to 100% now, right? In the 18th century, we didn't have state schools. Now we do, right? It costs an enormous amount. All right, so education can be provided and should be provided. And I'm radical on this. Not only third level education should, I know you're going to hate me for this, right? But not only should you be paying for your third level education, you should be paying for your second and your first. Primary education in the Republic of Ireland is largely a complicated and expensive babysitting service. That's what it is. They waste about 6 years of, they go to school too early and they spend their time doing make work. It's just nonsense. Anyway, let's leave that to aside. So health, education will be provided. Health and welfare. Again, welfare, as you know, began at the beginning of the 20th century, effectively, at least in the UK, as a way of providing some kind of stopgap way of making sure that people in real need and desperate circumstances sort of didn't starve in between their jobs. The ratio of providers to recipients was something like 18 or 20 to 1. You had about 20 taxpayers for every person in receipt of what was not particularly generous, even by the standards of the time, amount of money 20 to 1. Of course, as we know, so we went from a pyramid like this, okay, we have a large base to a small top, okay, and gradually as you go through the 20th century, it starts opening out. And now with the demographics in Europe, we have an inverted pyramid, right? So very soon, when you get to pay taxes, on a joyful day, you realize that for every one of you who's working, there will be 2 or 3 people in receipt of public benefits. See how happy that makes you feel, right? All right, so welfare's got to go. Again, there are various views on this. I mean, I'm a purist on this one. I just want the whole thing wiped out. But again, you can be a gradualist on this if you're a libertarian. You could see it being eliminated and reduced and so on, and retained, if you like, only for extreme poverty or whatever it might be. And then, so what's that? Health, and health as well. Okay, I mean, health is just a bottomless pit. No matter how much money you put in, you can never put enough in, and so on and so forth. And again, of course, I mean, think about this. If you provided car insurance, or sorry, if you provided car insurance cover in the same way that we provide health insurance, ask yourself what your premium would be, and the answers would go through the roof. Suppose that for your car insurance premium, you were able to have all the little scratches fixed and to take it into the garage every time you had a noise that you didn't particularly like, and all of this was covered by your car insurance premium. What would your premium be? Astronomical is the answer, right? But what do we have car insurance for? We have car insurance largely for the catastrophic event which we simply cannot fund from our own resources. That's the principal reason we have it. If you've got a really fancy car, then you're going to be paying an extra amount, you know, for slight damage and so on. But by and large, if you're like me and you're driving a sort of semi-banger, the one thing you really want is to make sure that if there's a crash which causes damage or injury to somebody, it's going to be, you know, 200,000 or $1 million or $1.5 million, that you're covered. So you lay that off through insurance. Well, health insurance should cover that. There's no reason why you should be insured, why the fee that you would pay when you go to consult a doctor should be covered. Why? I'm not covered, by the way. Oh, listen, I mean, because I live in the Republic, we have the best of everything down there, right? So I have private health insurance, and every time I go to the doctor, I pay. And every time I go to the hospital, I pay. And I pay taxes to pay for the health service, which doesn't pay for my going to the... I'm going, hang on a second, I must be losing things here. How is this supposed to work again? Right? Not to mention, of course, that it screws up the medical profession and all of the rest and makes the relationship between you and the doctor, which should be a private and personal relationship, into something that is supervised by the state, again, with all of the implications that it has for liberty. So health and education have to go. So, in the end, my approach, not everybody's approach, is as follows. Some people, like Rothbard, are kind of button pushers, and they say, if you had a magic button here on the table in front of you, and you could push this, and by pushing it, you could simply wipe out the state as it is and return us, if you like, to a non-state thing. Would you push it? And he says, yes. But even Rothbard says, I realize that in the current circumstances where the modern state has grown and it has entrails and hands everywhere and everything, to do that would involve, if you like, unnecessary destruction and suffering. So my approach is what I call deconstruction, which means getting, in fact, it's already started, because the utilities thing have basically gone away. So water and sewage, and I mean, again, it was inconceivable when I was growing up that anybody other than the local authority would collect your garbage. Now there are 5 companies competing for this. Okay, and I'm paying 1/4 of what I used to pay to my local authority. Okay, so all of that's already on the way out. Health, education, and welfare are the big ones that are going to have to go. And the reason for that is because almost everybody in some way is on the receiving end of benefits here. There's so many in the population who are receiving benefits to this. By the way, if they understood really what that means, in the end, they're paying for it as well, but they don't realize that. They only see what they get as they think free. They don't realize what the costs are. But that's another. So it's going to be a hard one to shift. All right. Suppose we could deconstruct. So what we do is, it's sort of like a building in the middle of the city. We take the floors down, we take down the utilities, and we take down health, education, and welfare. We get to the root of the building, and that root of the building is going to be the provision of legal services, justice, defense, and all of that, right? And that's where libertarians split. Every libertarian wants to get down there. Okay? That's where you want to go. And that's when you have one of those family quarrels that I was telling you about. Some libertarians say, well, while we agree that almost everything that we need in our social life together can be provided by free association, by contract and agreement, and so on, not everything can. And the not everything bit are those bits of law, justice, and security. There are others, me and a few others, who say, no, there's no reason to stop in principle. You can actually go all the way down. That all of these things, including law, justice, security, the provision of justice, courts, and all of the rest, can in fact be provided by free association among people, agreements and contracts and the like. In the end, this discussion, important as it is to people like myself who get all excited about it, is a bit of a luxury. Because, hey, if in the morning you told me you could get that building down to the law, justice, and security, I'd be the happiest man. I would be ecstatic. Because it would be so close to where I thought we should be going compared to where we are now. I'm not really going to get all excited about that, with the fact that we haven't gone the other little bit. Mind you, I would be pushing for it, of course, needless to say, the day after, but that's another story. So that's what libertarianism is about. And the reason is because in doing everything that it does, there is a downside to all of this provision stuff. The state, first of all, in order to pay for all of these things which it gives you, well, think about it, for example. Where does the state get its money? It doesn't have any money. It's not, I mean, unless it's, by the way, in the business of business, which it shouldn't be, sometimes is, if it has semi-state companies, but then it's competing with the private sector. So the state has no way of generating any money of its own. The only way the state can get money is by taking it from you. Okay? And then giving it to you. Now, I want you to think about this. I mean, this seems like a good idea, and very often when people think about humanitarian disasters, you think, oh, this is good. I mean, we just had, there was a conference just done in Dublin, and one of our junior ministers just signed something saying we're going to give 21 million to, I don't know, wherever it is. And I'm saying, hang on a second, that sounds very generous. The trouble is, you're being generous with other people's money. So let me give you again my hackneyed example here. You're walking down there in front of Queen's, right? You and a friend of yours, and somebody, sitting on the side of the street saying, homeless for the night, give me some money. Now, you're perfectly free, of course, to put your hand into your pocket or not, and take your money out or not, and give it to this person or not. Right? And you are free, of course, to encourage your friend to be generous. You could say to your friend, why don't you give something to this guy here? And your friend can say, no, thank you, I'd rather not. Right? And you can say, you're a miserable git, and the guy says, you're absolutely right, and I'm still not giving them any money. Okay? What you may not do, however desperate the situation of the person on the street, what you may not do is put your hand into your companion's pocket and take their money and give it to somebody else, no matter how much good it would do. That's not your job. You can give your own money. Giving other people's money is a bit of a problem. Back in one of the earliest Congress in the United States, when Daniel Boone was a congressman, he voted for something like this, for some relief project. And one of his constituents wrote to him and said, I'll never vote for you again. And Boone was so taken aback, he suddenly realized, no, that's not his job. That the money, such as it was, if you like, for the general good and wasn't for, if you like, deliverance for any particular person. So, as Bastia says, the state is that organization by which one half the population tries to live at the expense of the other half, and that typically is what happens. We have taxpayers and then tax receivers. So the state is involved in this business of reallocating resources in one particular way. You may not have reached the stage of being the taxpayers yet, but wait till you do, and you'll realize just how much fun it is. Okay, as you see your money being. And so if you think there's something out there, if you think there are people in need, hey, give them your own money. Organize a charity, raise money, raise events, do everything you want, but don't steal other people's money to do it. And the fact that the state does it doesn't make it any less stealing. Right? Whatever justification there might be in the state raising money for law, order, defense, and justice, right? And I don't think there's much. But whatever justification there is for doing that, there is no justification for raising money, in other words, taking your money, to do good elsewhere, even though that good is a genuine good. By the way, I don't think a lot of foreign aid is not a genuine good, but that's another story anyway. Somebody once said foreign aid is just the poor and rich countries giving to the rich and poor countries. That's Peter Bauer, I think. Yeah. Anyway, so here's the deal. What we want then is we want this deconstruction, okay? And then the reason for this is that the state, in taxing, which it does, right, is in fact, from the point of view of the non-aggression principle, breaking it, right? You might say, well, taxes are voluntary. And I say, well, if that's the case, what I want is I want the Internal Revenue Service to send me out a nice letter saying, please, if you don't mind, and if you feel up to it, would you send us some money this year? Okay, and see how much they get. The Internal Revenue doesn't work like that. It sends you a demand, or it simply takes your money in advance. Or in fact, as it's done all over the world, it simply turned every employer into an unpaid tax collector, which is a real feat when you think about it. So not only do you have, as an employer, to collect taxes on behalf of the government, you actually have to pay for the privilege of collecting the taxes for the government. That's a neat trick, right? We can thank Milton Friedman for part of that, right? He regretted it afterwards, so I am glad to say he repented of his evil ways and so on. He came up with that idea when he was working for the American government during the Second War. So the state, as a tax extractor, is violating against the property of the people whose money it takes. If people want to give money voluntarily to the state, as Ayn Rand thought they could do, and that's how it would be fun, great, terrific. But I'm not stopping them, but that's not how it works for me. And of course, the state, needless to say, takes ever more and more, and temporary taxes become permanent taxes, and their rates go up and up and up. So the income tax, which of course came into the UK as a temporary measure during the Napoleonic era, is still with us. Okay, they had to get and had to pass an amendment to the Constitution in the United States to get it in, and so on. And once in, it grows and grows and grows, and then the variety of taxes become astonishing. When I'm in the United States, I tell people what we pay, and they just have a nervous breakdown. So I had a friend of mine, I was out in Chicago, and he was complaining about paying an 8% sales tax. And I said, I laughed. I said, how would you like to pay 23% VAT? He goes, what? I go, yeah, that's just a little bit short of 3 times what you're paying in one of the major metropolitan areas in the United States. He thought it was being ripped off and violated. And I said, yeah, we routinely do this. How would you like, the price of your petrol to be increased by about 120% simply because the government wants to take this money? Okay. So not only do they take the money off you when you earn it, they take the money off you when you spend it. On VAT, they take it off in excise duties. They take it off, in so many bewildering ways. It's unbelievable. Now, of course, we have a property tax coming up. I love this one. We're told, figure away to this, we are the only country that doesn't have a property tax. And I go, well, actually, we do. It's called stamp duty, right? And I paid it when I bought my house. And stamp duty was typically for because of course the house prices went up and the rates stayed where they were. So people buying modest homes in Dublin were paying 7, 8 or 9% of the cost of the house in stamp duty. So you buy a house worth 300,000, you're paying 25 or 30,000 in stamp duty before you. So, and of course that's part of your mortgage and it's part of the cost that you're paying over and over. You do as a friend of mine do, you buy 3 houses and move house twice. He's paid 3 sets of stamp duties. So that means he's paid something in the region of 120 or maybe 150,000 to the government simply for the benefit of buying a house. And now the government is saying to him, you're not paying a property tax. I go, sorry? I thought I paid it in lump sum up front, right? We're apparently not paying water charge. And I say, well, but if you're going to itemize my taxes, why don't you tell me what that large sum of money that you take from me every year goes for? If it isn't going for water and it isn't going for all the other things, what exactly is it going for? Right? So government is a violator of the non-aggression principle. Right? And that's why libertarians don't like governments. All right? And that's why we want to see it minimized, or in my case, as an anarchist, I want to see it eliminated. Now, let me just finish, because I'm sure you have questions here, and I don't want to keep you all day. You're going to get all sorts of questions, and the questions come like, oh, who would build the roads, and all of that. And I have this. I downloaded this, by the way. This is a variety of. There's about 60 or 70 various objections, including cartoons here. If anybody wants this, just email me, and I'll send it to you. It's too much to photocopy. It's about 60 or 70 pages. So first name dot last name gerard.casey@ucd.ie. Just send me an email. Okay, and I'll send it to you. But there's a lot of stuff. And there's also, this is a great book called Secrets of Libertarian Persuasion. This guy's really good. And so there's a lot of really good stuff in this for how you actually would deal with, you can save yourself a lot of grief okay, by getting this book. I mean, I wish I'd had this book about 20 years ago. It would have been terrific. Anyway, so to come to the last point, which is on anarchism. Anarchism is sometimes presented, I mean, the word itself is problematic, but I wear it as a badge of honor. It seems to suggest, if you like, that we're sort of, I don't know, 19th century bearded Russians with sort of a bomb and a little fuse. But the irony is, of course, that libertarianism is, of all the political philosophies, the most pacifistic. The very core principle, it says, is you're not supposed to aggress. That's the heart of it, right? You're not allowed to aggress against another person or property. The government does it all the time. Other political philosophies are selective in what they allow aggression on. You're not allowed aggression here, but you are over here, right? Libertarians are consistent and say you must not aggress. Anarchism is not anti-law. It's not anti-order. It's not anti-society. I live in society. I want to live in society. I want friends. I want to be able to contract. I want to be able to have all sorts of goods, and I want them available to me at the cheapest possible cost and all of the rest. This is only possible if we have order. Anarchists, what the A in that, the negative particle, says is a rejection of top-down, imposed order by people who know what you need and what you want better than you do yourself. It simply says human society is self-organizing. People from the beginning of time have got together and organized themselves to provide for their wants and their needs, and they will continue to do so. They do it even today. If you think about it and you ask yourself, you do a check on, if you do a 24-hour check on what you do during a day, ask yourself how much of what you do is in fact anarchic. In other words, not governed by rules which will sanction you if you don't behave in a certain way, but simply originating from the desire that we have to associate with people. Our rules of etiquette, the way we talk to people, the way we stand, how far we stand from people, what we do, the fact that we queue, all of these things are not enforced by legal sanctions. But they are effective. Most of what you do during a day is anarchic. Right? Most of human society, from the beginnings of its very beginnings, about 4 billion years ago, from 100,000 until we have Homo erectus and then whatever it is, has been anarchic. Most people have lived. It's only recently in historic times, from about maybe middle of the Neolithic period, about 6,000 BC, we see the beginnings of states. But even then, they were simply jumped up towns where somebody got above himself and started, and so on. So by and large, the population wasn't affected by this. One of my professors once said to me, the basic principle of politics is this. And I go, what is it? He goes, the peasant always pays. So leaders come and leaders go, and that's the exciting bit of history. But in the end, the peasant just wants to know, where's my pig gun today? Right? Goes to this guy, doesn't care. Whoever wins the battle, somebody comes and nicks my pig. That's how it works, right, in the end, whether it's pigs or money and so on. But it's only recently said that the modern state is vile, okay, and the largest single, not the only one, I would want to say, by the way, the largest single intrusive force limiting your freedom. Now, once you're free, the question is, what do you do? And the answer is, well, you can do anything as a libertarian, as long as you don't violate the non-aggression principle. And as I said, you could live your life simply on that principle, and that would be, I think, not particularly entrancing. Who would want to do that, right? But the area, then, okay, so this is definitely going to be my final remark. The area in which law works, libertarian law has to work, is in the enforcement of the non-aggression principle. In other words, for the libertarian, laws, and I don't mean our regulations that we make for running a society or a club or anything that we might generate by contract, but laws which apply to everybody, regardless of whether they give their consent or not, okay, are laws that prohibit aggression. You can't, I mean, this is the truth of the saying. You've probably heard the saying, ignorance of the law is no defense. Well, if that's the case, we're all in serious trouble. I mean, if you don't believe me, go walk down the law library and see all the statutes and ask yourself, who knows this? And the answer is nobody. I've got 2 law degrees. I don't know any of this. Like it's hardly possible to go through a day without violating probably 20 or 30 of these things, if only you knew it. Right? But when people say ignorance of the law is no defense, they mean there are certain things that, provided that you're not suffering from a strange mental disease, you cannot not know. You cannot walk up to somebody, shoot them, and then when people come and arrest you, say, really? I wasn't supposed to do that? This comes as a real surprise and shock to me. Okay? How come nobody ever told me this before? Right? And of course, or even if you watch little kids playing, one of the first things they will say, they will object to, is one other kid taking their toys. Right? There's a sense of meum and teum there. We know what belongs to us, and we know that when somebody takes what's ours, it's a violation, and that's so on. This is the core of the law. And indeed, in legal theory, they distinguish between things that are malum in se, wrong in and of themselves, and things that are malum prohibita, things that are simply the way in which we have to regulate things. So let me give you an example. So killing people, okay, just for the fun of it, not a good idea. Every society everywhere has a restriction on the indiscriminate killing of members of the in-group. They may have different standards for the out-group, but nonetheless, you can't just go around killing people indiscriminately. Okay, that's going to be homicide and you have to answer for it. You can't go around helping yourself to the property of the people in your core group. No society can function unless you have those two basic systems in place. It's just not possible. Right? Driving on the left or driving on the right? Well, it's really a matter of indifference. In fact, I was watching some old movies from about 1903 or 1904, and it showed a scene in Cork City where well-known street, and there's a tram coming around, and there's a donkey and cart moving, and there are cyclists and the pedestrians strolling, and it's just chaos. Everybody is there all over the place. They're on different sides of the road, but they're going so slowly, it doesn't make any difference. It's like the way you walk down the street. We don't have a line down the middle of the street. You just kind of move out of people's way and so on because the speed is so slow. But once the speed gets up, then it makes sense to decide, listen guys, it doesn't really matter whether it's the left or the right, but we got to choose, because otherwise we're going to be driving at 5 miles an hour. If we want to speed up, we're going to have to pick, so we all go on the left. So in that situation, you can't give vent to your sort of creative, artistic feelings by deciding, today I'll make my life more exciting by driving on the right. Okay, if you do, you're going to get into serious trouble. So those have been malum prohibita. Those are the regulations that any society or group will make, if you like, to regulate its affairs more efficiently. Those have no particular moral status. There's no, you're not morally more correct than an American because you drive on the left. That's just the way we do things here, or whatever the case might be. But killing people and stealing, those are malum in se. They are wrong in and of themselves, and every society has that. And that's the core of libertarian law. That's not a matter of agreement. That's not something that you say, I didn't sign up to that, so you can't hold me to it. You're stuck with that whether you like it or not. The other things, however, are matters of agreement, and they would be arranged, as we arrange most of our daily affairs, by our needs and interests, what we're prepared to pay, what we're really interested in, and so on and so forth. And what we get is a more efficient and more streamlined system, and one that is minimally intrusive on our liberties. That's libertarianism. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Casey. Does anyone have any questions to ask at all?
He's not allowed.
Okay.
See, I kind of agree with you on the sort of social issues, but when it comes to sort of economics, you don't really say that capitalism always gravitates towards monopoly.
We have an economist here. Should I ask? The answer is not necessarily. And it depends on what you mean by monopoly. Okay, I mean.
So I mean in regards to you need a state there for regulation.
Yeah. No, I know how it works. I mean, it's that and the public goods arguments. It's the two sort of major economic arguments against libertarianism. I'm not saying, by the way, when I say that they're important arguments, but you see, monopoly is a kind of slippery concept. For example, I am the monopoly provider of my services. I'm the only one who provides my services. No one else does. I have a monopoly on it. Is that a bad thing? Well, maybe if you just listen to me for 45 minutes, you might think, but that's it. Coke is the only one who makes Coke. They have a monopoly on it. Is that a bad idea? No. Okay. There are other drinks and so on and so forth. It's not a problem. It would be a problem, by the way, if Coke were using force of violence to exclude people from the market or the soft drink market or Coca-Cola substitutes or whatever it is that they do. So the idea is that the basic idea here is that see if I got your point, is that in a free market, if we don't regulate, if the government doesn't regulate it, what happens is that somebody's going to grab hold of the supplies of everything, and then once they've done it and they've locked down the suppliers, they're going to raise the prices, and people are going to be forced to pay it. Well, it doesn't actually. If you look at economic history, it doesn't quite work like that. There's a standard example. I can't give you the details on it, but you check it out. From the first time that aluminium was supplied in the United States, when they began production about 1820, now this is all kind of vague, but it's around about that time, the cost was something like 89 cents a pound. There was only one company providing this. There were no competitors. This sounds like a monopoly, doesn't it? What do you think the price was by 1890? Sorry? No, it had gone down to 16 cents a pound. Increased production, superior technology, and so on, increased supplies, larger deposits, prices went down. Now, monopoly again, it depends on what you're doing. So, I mean, if I control all the airlines, then people can still travel. They can walk, they can take cars, or they can take planes. So again, there's all sorts of ways that there are monopolies. And again, in the end, for most things, unless you're talking about every single foodstuff, right? People have a choice. They don't have to pay it. Okay? Right now, for example, the government have a monopoly on the taxes they put on my petrol. I can't not pay that. Okay, I'd rather pay 73 cents a litre for my petrol than 162. I don't have that option. So where monopoly really comes into existence historically is, paradoxically, through government. In other words, monopolies were granted by governments to favourites, or whatever they might be, for favours rendered or for once-off payments, so that you then were given a monopoly. And what a monopoly meant was you now had, the law would now enforce your right to be the only person to import this particular wine or to sell this particular product. So it's a slippery term, but the original meaning is precisely that. The idea, a de facto monopoly where there's just one person who's supplying, is not a problem, right? Provided that the person who has that monopoly isn't using force of violence to prevent new entrants into the market. Okay. And let me get this. This is a spectacular example. It happened only recently. Who invented the what do you call the phone, the electronic phone? What do you call this? No, it's just the ordinary phone. They like digital cameras, right? Which company invented digital cameras? Yeah, Kodak have been around for how long?
I heard, is this the one Instagram?
Yeah, they've been around for 100 years. Kodak they had a boxy camera. They had the huge resources. If anything looked like a monopoly, and suddenly they're the ones who invent this new technology, you could see, good grief, the market's open. They're out of business. They're gone. Why? Because in the free market, even in the very restricted and highly regulated free market we have, right, they simply couldn't compete. They were a lumbering dinosaur. They simply couldn't compete. And when you can't compete, right, in the real free market, the government doesn't bail you out. Okay, that's the pals, the banks, right? In the real free market, okay, if you can't cut it, you lose it, right? And your assets are redistributed to people who can make more effective use of it. Okay, generally to the benefit of the consumer. Did I do okay on that one?
Yeah.
Thank you. Got an economist there. I've got to be careful what I say.
Any more questions?
Professor Casey, do you think there's a necessary connection between Christian moral teaching and libertarianism? If I might put it crudely, would Jesus be a libertarian? And if so, might it be fair to address the religious foundation of libertarianism rather than a secular ethics?
Well, okay, I gave a talk a couple of years ago at the Mises Institute where I said that all Christians should be libertarians. I didn't say that all libertarians should be Christians, which is a different story, right? And my argument is very simple. Okay, and you've raised the question, so I hope you don't mind if I answer this. Okay, if other people are uncomfortable, just turn off your hearing aids for the moment. And it's this: I'm a Christian. I believe that God made the universe and sustains it in being at every moment of its existence. Right? And in that sense, in a kind of Lockean sense, the entire universe is His, in some absolute sense, property. Everything that exists is God's property. In that sense, God has an absolute right to do with His property as He chooses. Right? Now, that being so, if He's made us in His image and likeness, which, again, as a Christian, I believe He has a right, if He so chooses, to interfere when He sees us doing something He doesn't like us doing. But I happen to believe that He actually doesn't do that. He may not be happy with it, right? But nonetheless, He has given us freedom, and the consequence of that is, if it's to be genuine, see, it's like your kid. I mean, your kids aren't really free to cross the road on their own, right? They may think they are, but that's only when there's nothing around and the road is clear. In reality, you're looking out for them, and if there's any traffic around, you grab their hand, and you don't care whether they kick or scream, right? They're not crossing that road with heavy traffic, right? So they're not really free in the way that they think they are. right? But if human beings are really free, then they have to be free to do things that God does not want them to do. And here's the kicker on this one. If God, on the Christian view, is the one who, more than anybody else, to a degree we couldn't even understand, has the right to do with his creation whatever he wants, if he doesn't interfere with your freedom, where does anybody else get off? Right? Now, I'm not talking about interfering with aggression, okay? I'm not talking about it. But where does anybody else get off? There is no room for me in a Christian vision of things. As a Christian, for example, I believe if I see somebody, if my friends are doing things I think are foolish, then depending on the kind of friendship we have, I can remonstrate with them. I can point out to them, that the foolishness of what they're doing and suggesting they might like to do something. I mean, I don't want to give the impression, by the way, that I do this all the time. But, if it was a really bad case, I might do that, as friends do. But what I cannot do is use force to violate their freedom, to make them do the things that I think I want them to do. And I think that's all. So, I would think, as I said, I think that Christians should be libertarians. I think that's the only political philosophy that's consistent. Most Christians are statists, by the way, right? But I don't think that the reverse follows. I don't think all libertarians should be Christians. That's another story. That's entirely up for them. And there are, as I said at the start, there are lots of libertarians who are atheists, and that's just fine. You've got to go, right? Great to see you. Thanks. Bye.
Any other questions? Cal,
I've got one if no one else has got one.
Right, fire, go for it.
Cian.
Oh, Cian, no, fire, you go. No, you go first then. Sorry.
My question would just be, how applicable is libertarianism?
Sorry, say that again, I missed it.
Oh, sorry. How applicable is, or how applicable is libertarianism in today's Western society, in the sense that people look around, or I think people would agree that when the destination becomes, the more people tend to want more rather than go out and get it themselves. For example, my experience going through secondary school in Sligo, everyone tells you go to university, get a degree, a job will be waiting for you.
That's another fantasy.
Yeah. So my question would be, how applicable is it? I mean, people don't want to have these values; they want more to me rather than paying for it.
Okay, human nature being what it is. I mean, if it's a choice between having somebody giving you stuff for free or getting out of work, because most people are inclined to just sit back and kick back and do it. Hey, the money's there, sort of take it. But let me sort of try and give you the positive vision of libertarianism here, because very often when I talk about this in things, people think that what I'm pushing for is a society exactly like the society we've got, minus welfare. Right? That's what they think I'm saying. Well, I do want welfare. I do want welfare gone. By the way, I want corporate welfare gone as well. Okay, assistance to companies and banks and all of the rest. I want all of the money than others. I want the government to stop taking money and giving it to everybody who hasn't, in a sense, earned it. I want them to stop that, whether it's companies or tax reductions for this, or big breaks, or grants, or whatever they might, be. So that's across the board. But that's not the vision I have. You see. Just as I was talking earlier about the unimaginability, for example, of people in the, say, 16th century of thinking that we could live in democracies now without kings. So I want you to see this. The libertarian vision is of a world in which people are free to earn their living, relate to other people, okay, make whatever income they can, pay for themselves and their families, contribute to their societies or to charities as much as they see fit or can possibly do, right? And in doing that, not only are they, if you like, free, in other words, because if they are making their living for themselves, then they can give the two fingers to anybody who's telling them what to do. Right now, if you're a recipient of government charity, you're not in a position to do that, right? But it's also liberating in a more positive sense, because you are not, I don't know, I mean, maybe some people have got to the stage where they're so used, if you like, simply receiving stuff that they don't find it demeaning anymore, right? But I would find that. I mean, if I was in desperate straits and I had to take the money, I would take it, but I wouldn't be happy about it, okay? Most people, it seems to me, okay, I'm making a claim here, and you can tell me I'm wrong on this, but most people, if presented with a choice of earning their own living, providing for themselves and their families and their societies and their communities and their charities or whatever they want to do, and their churches or whatever, right? Or simply being a recipient, of what is effectively state charity, that's money taken from another group of people and transferred to them. I would say we'd go for the former. If that's not the case, then I think that person has been warped so that they don't really, in a sense, understand what is in their own best interest. Because that's the vision I have of Libertarian Society. It's not just I'm all right, Jack, and you can all go screw yourselves. It's a vision in which people will do things for other people. They have done it in the past, and they do it now. Even in a society in which we live, where we have this incredible rate of taxation, by the way, a rate of taxation which is about 3 times higher than that collapsed the Roman Empire. Do you know that? Right? Okay. I mean, in the Roman Empire, people were fleeing the towns because the rate of taxation was so high. They had to actually nail people's feet to the floor to get them to undertake civic responsibilities. Right? We're doing about 3 times as high. It's quite extraordinary. Right? So we're because of the boiling frog syndrome, we're so used to this, we don't even see. If I were to say to somebody, taxation is theft, they think I'm engaging hyperbole. And I go, well, no, theft is I mean it literally. In other words, if somebody takes something from you that you don't give them permission to have or don't want them to have, and they take it by you by force or the threat of force, that's theft. That's what the government does. The government does it every single day. Okay? If you want to think it in terms of forced labour, okay, right now, if you're paying taxation at about 40%, which is what we are, you're working 2/5, 40% of the year for the government. Just think, if you didn't have to do that, you could have 4 months off, or 3 months off, or whatever the percentage is. But you don't. That's almost like forced labour. You have to do it. The government forces you to pay this in order for you just to live and go about your business. What business is of anybody else? If you want to deal with people, you want to relate to them, you want to bargain, make deals and all of the rest, and do whatever you want to do, go and do it. Right? A society like this would, as far as I'm concerned, not only survive, but it would flourish. Right? You would see just a general raising of the standard of living all across the board, and not only material wealth, but artistic wealth and all of the rest, all of the other things that people will do with this. Can I know this for certain? No. Okay, but I look into the past and I see what people have done, and that's how it works. Right now, for example, I'm limited in the amount I can give to charity. Why? Because roughly 40% of my income disappears before I ever see it. Despite that, I still give money to charity. Right? Just think how much more I'd be in a position to give, and how much more I would be able to direct it, and how much more efficiently the people I would give it to would dispose of it and make use of it. Let me ask you this question. If you had some extra money in your pocket and you wanted to do something good for people in need, would you A, give it to the government, or B, give it to a targeted charity whom you had investigated and whose doings and activities you knew of and whose administration costs were not more than 10 or 15%? Which would you do? I know what I would do, right? And so do you. Right? That's what we would do with those kinds of things. Sorry, it was a long-winded question, a long-winded answer to your question. You want to ask a question, sir?
Can I have 2 questions?
He's going to ask 2.
Yeah, 2.
Privileges of chairing the session.
The first one's kind of straightforward. Were you always a libertarian?
No, God, no. Do you want me to give the life? I'll give you the shortened version of my life story on that one.
Yeah, go on ahead.
Is that okay? I became a libertarian by accident at a very late stage in my life, and it all had to do with money. And the reason was, I have a friend, Brian O'Connor, who's a professor with me in the department, and we talk about all sorts of things. And we're talking about money. And money is a kind of mysterious thing. You know, people give you goods and services or grubby little pieces of paper. It seems like a mystery to me. Okay. And so I was interested in the philosophical question of what money was. And so he went on sabbatical. He's a German, he's interested in German philosophy. And he was in sabbatical in Germany one year. And when he came back, he brought me back a copy of Ludwig von Mises' Theory of Money and Credit. This is not the book that you want to start with, I guarantee you. It's a German book. It's serious footnotes and all of the rest. But for me, it answered the questions. It explained what money was and how money originated without government. Money originates spontaneously. You don't believe me? Look at the old World War II films of people in camps. What did they use for money? Cigarettes. Unopened packets of cigarettes. Any good which has high exchange value relative to any other good will become money. Tobacco, wampum, stones, beads, jewels, gold, silver, all are money. Okay. And that's how money comes into being. Money was already in existence before the first coins were minted by the Lydians. Right? So that got me started, and I started reading. And within a year, I think I had read everything I could get my hands on by Mises, most of Rothbard, and of course I found my way to the Mises Institute, and once you're in there, you're never going to get out again. It's like going down the sinkhole. And so on. So within a year and a half, I'd become a libertarian. Within 2 years, I was an anarchist. Because I think that's the consistent position. So that's the first question.
The second question is, like, the road to this kind of society that libertarian would like to see is a very long one if we ever get down that road. But if you could implement or take away or change one policy or just one tiny aspect of things to get that road started, what would it be?
I would continue. Well, I just to come back to my point about deconstruction, I would just keep pushing on the utility stuff. In other words, get every utility out of so-called state or public ownership and so on. That's already well on the way. So I'm sort of pushing on an open door there. But health, education, and welfare have to go. Those are the things I would attack straight off, right? And those are really tough ones. Okay, will I do them serially? Will I do them all at once? I don't know. Whatever works. Okay, and any gain is a gain. It's like Rothbard says, you don't want to be, he described what he called a beltway libertarian. The beltway is the ring road that goes around the Washington. And he says, you go up to Washington and you're a keen libertarian, you want to change the world, and within 5 years, you've been talked out of it. Why? Because you get so involved with little tiny changes, and you're invited to parties, and you make to feel important, and you're meeting Senator so-and-so and Congressman so-and-so, and eventually you're really concerned about reducing, I don't know, somebody's subsidy by 0.0002%, and this is the big thing in your life. You've lost, okay? You have lost the big picture, right? The big picture is to get the government primarily, and anybody else, by the way, any other group of people who wants to interfere with your liberties in a coercive way, right? Out of your life, right? But the government is the big one. Okay, the others will follow. So you need to get all of those, and whether you do it, I would think education is one that could go. If I had to attack one of the three first, I would attack education. And that would have to go. Now, the liberating thing about that, by the way, is if you pay for your education, A, you value it, and B, you make sure you get value for money. You don't believe me? Who founded the University of Bologna in the Middle Ages? The students. Who ran it? The students. Why? Because it was the law university. They hired their own professors. If you were a professor and you got married, the students would allow you 1 day off for your honeymoon. They fined you if you cut your lectures short. It was student paid for and student run, and by God, they got value for money. Right? You're going to pay for this education, by the way. You're just not going to pay for it now. Pay for it in the future. But pay for it you will. My point is, why don't you pay for it up front rather than in a mysterious way where you have no idea what it is you're actually paying for something? Imagine again if you went into a grocery store and you came up with a basket of goods, and coincidentally the person in front of you had exactly the same parcel of goods. And the cashier said to the person in front of you, that'll be £15.27. And when you arrived, he said, that'll be £27.23. You go, sorry, we've got exactly the same amount of stuff. And the person goes, yes, but you earn more. You go, what? Okay, how does that follow? I'm getting the same stuff and you're going to charge me more because I earn more? How does that work? That's how progressive taxation, so-called, works. I love the name, by the way. Okay, it's a regressive taxation, but that's progressive taxation. And it's not only that you pay more tax if you earn more, of course you do, even if you're paying 10% across the board, right? But you pay proportionately more, right? It's quite mad. It's insane, but we're so used to it. It's unbelievable. I mean,
any other questions? No. Okay then. Thank you very much then, Professor Casey.
Okay, not at all. Thank you very much indeed, and good luck to your society.